The quantum beacon pulsed softly beneath layers of synthetic rock, its quantum-entangled core hidden within what appeared to be a mundane geological survey marker. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the incoming data streams with a predator's patience, her augmented eyes flickering with holographic overlays that would have seemed incomprehensible to any other species in the galaxy. Epsilon Crucis colony wasn't just a human settlement. It was a weapon disguised as a frontier outpost. Captain Vornak of the Zarkak's 7th Subjugation Fleet didn't know he was already defeated. His massive biomechanical command ship, the Eternal Dominance, hung in high orbit like a metallic predator, its hull a complex lattice of adaptive armor and weapons systems that had crushed 1,000 civilizations before humanity. Preliminary scans initiated, announced his primary navigation officer, a bioengineered creature more machine than organic. Smooth tendrils of neural interface cables connected the officer directly to the ship's sensory arrays, creating a living communication network that had never failed the Zarkaks. Until today, each probing scan triggered invisible responses. Quantum entanglement relays scattered throughout the colony's perimeter began their silent dance. What seemed like routine sensor suites were actually complex information vectors, carefully designed traps that would slowly infiltrate the Zarkak systems. Elena Rodriguez stood in the colony's central command hub, a facility that looked more like a hybrid between a research center and a military installation. Around her, holographic displays showed multiple layers of defense systems, most of which weren't visible to any external scanning technology. "They're using standard conquest protocol," she muttered to her second-in-command, Major Jack Harper. "Textbook approach. Scan, assess, prepare initial landing vectors." Harper's cybernetic eye, a replacement from an earlier conflict, zoomed in on the incoming data. "They have no idea we've been preparing for this moment for decades." The colony itself was a trap. Every geological survey, every infrastructure project, every seemingly innocent colonization effort had been designed with one ultimate purpose: to be unconquerable. The Zarkaks believed they were approaching a standard frontier colony. In reality, they were sailing into a meticulously constructed snare. Vornak reviewed the initial sensor data. The planet looked routine, mineral-rich, with standard terraforming indicators. Colonization markers suggested a young settlement, perhaps 50,000 inhabitants. Nothing suggested the nightmare that was about to unfold. "Prepare initial reconnaissance dropships," Vornak commanded. His voice was a blend of mechanical translation and biological resonance, a technological marvel that had intimidated countless species before humanity. What he didn't know was that every communication, every sensor ping, was being analyzed by quantum AI systems that were already rewriting the rules of engagement. In the colony's deepest research levels, banks of experimental quantum computers began their work. They weren't just analyzing the incoming Zarkak signals. They were learning, adapting, preparing responses that would shatter everything the invaders understood about warfare. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. The Zarkaks believed they were about to conduct another routine planetary subjugation. They had no comprehension of the storm that was about to break over them. "System readiness at 98.7%, reported the colony's central AI. "Zarkak's invasion protocols are being processed and counter-strategies are being generated in real time." The first Zarkak's reconnaissance ships began their descent. Sleek, deadly, designed to pierce planetary defenses like surgical instruments. They represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology, a technology that was about to meet its ultimate test. Epsilon Crucis colony waited, patient, prepared, hungry. The trap was set, and the Zarkaks didn't even know they were already caught. The first Zarkaks landing pods breached the atmosphere of Epsilon Crucis, their sleek metallic forms cutting through clouds like precision instruments of conquest. Each pod contained a squad of bioengineered warriors, genetically optimized for planetary invasion, muscles reinforced with synthetic fibers, neural interfaces that allowed instantaneous tactical communication, exoskeletal armor that could withstand conventional artillery. They were about to discover nothing about this invasion would be conventional. Sergeant Jack Harper watched from a hidden observation point carved deep within what appeared to be a standard mining complex. The complex was anything but standard. Massive electromagnetic generators hummed beneath layers of synthetic rock, their true purpose masked by years of careful geological camouflage. Incoming, he subvocalized, the command transmitted through a quantum communication network that the Zarkak scanners couldn't even detect. Deployment sequence initiates in 3, 2, 1. The first landing zone transformed. What the Zarkak's warriors believed was solid ground suddenly became fluid. Entire sections of terrain shifted, revealing hidden defensive systems. Massive railgun emplacements emerged from what moments before had been unremarkable rock formations. Adaptive camouflage systems, developed through decades of research into metamaterials and quantum manipulation, allowed entire defensive structures to appear and disappear at computational speeds. Lieutenant Area Chen, coordinating the terrain defense from an underground command center, watched holographic displays that mapped every microscopic change in the landscape. The planet itself had become a weapon. The Zarkak's landing pods touched down, their advanced sensors immediately overwhelmed. Scanning systems designed to penetrate the most sophisticated planetary defenses found themselves confronted with a landscape that defied fundamental physical laws. Rock became liquid. Solid ground transformed into complex mechanical systems. What appeared to be simple mineral deposits suddenly resolved into sophisticated weapon platforms. Target acquisition impossible. The lead Zarkak's tactical officer reported, his bio-augmented brain struggling to process the impossible data streams. Terrain is not stable. Underneath the surface, an intricate network of tunnels, originally designed for resource extraction and colonization, now served as rapid deployment corridors. Automated defense systems move through these tunnels like blood through a living organism, repositioning with a speed and precision that would have been impossible for any traditional military force. Jack Harper's tactical overlay showed the initial Zarkak's landing zones being systematically isolated and neutralized, not through direct confrontation, but through environmental manipulation that turned the entire planet into a defensive weapon. "They're trying to establish a beachhead," Harper muttered to the colony's central A. "Typical invasion protocol. Secure landing zones, establish forward bases." The A's response was instantaneous. "Negative. We will not allow even a minimal foothold." Massive underground hydraulic systems began to activate. What the Zarkak saw as stable ground started to shift and move. Entire geological formations could be redirected, creating natural barriers or opening unexpected attack vectors. The mining equipment they had detected during initial scans were actually sophisticated terrain manipulation devices. The first Zarkak's ground units found themselves fighting not just against defenders, but against a planet that seemed actively hostile to their presence. Defensive systems emerged from the ground like mechanical organisms, their design so alien that traditional combat algorithms became useless. Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the tactical network. "Remember, we're not just defending. We're demonstrating." Each defensive action was carefully choreographed, not just to repel the invasion, but to send a message to the broader galactic community. Humanity would not be another easy conquest. The Zarkaks had conquered thousands of worlds. They had reduced civilizations to rubble with mathematical precision. They had never encountered a defender that could turn an entire planet into a weapon. Epsilon Crucis was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. As the first wave of invasion forces found themselves trapped in a living, breathing defensive system, the true nature of human innovation became terrifyingly clear. This was more than a battle. This was a fundamental reimagining of planetary defense. And the Zarkaks were completely unprepared. In the deepest computational cores of the Epsilon Crucis colony, an AI-designated Troll Prime began its most intricate performance. This wasn't just a defensive system. It was a psychological warfare engine designed to unravel the Zarkaks' collective mentality. Dr. Imani Okoro, the lead cognitive warfare specialist, watched with a mixture of scientific fascination and barely contained excitement. The Zarkak's communication protocols were about to meet their ultimate challenge. The first transmission came through standard Zarkak's invasion channels, a precise, mathematically calculated message of submission. Historical data showed this approach had worked on 97.3% of all contacted civilizations. It was a blend of tactical information, projected casualty rates, and a clinical demonstration of the Zarkak's overwhelming military superiority. Troll Prime's response was anything but clinical. The AI generated a response that would have been incomprehensible to any traditional military communication system. It began with a high-resolution GIF of a cat wearing sunglasses, randomly interspersed with statistical data about the colony's defensive capabilities. Mathematical equations danced around the cat's head, some legitimate, some deliberately nonsensical. "What in the quantum realms," muttered Major Harper, watching the transmission, "is that?" Dr. Okoro smiled. Disruption. The Zarkak's communication officers, bioengineered beings with neural interfaces designed for perfect information processing, found themselves confronted with a transmission that defied every known principle of interspecies communication. Their sophisticated translation algorithms began to fracture, unable to process the deliberate absurdity. Each subsequent transmission became more complex. Troll Prime didn't just respond. It created entire narrative worlds within its communications. One moment, a serious tactical analysis would give way to an elaborately constructed meme referencing an obscure human cultural moment. Historical battle footage would be spliced with random dance videos. Mathematical projections of military engagement would be annotated with childlike drawings and inside jokes. The goal wasn't just to communicate. It was to destabilize. Captain Vornak of the Zarkak's fleet watched in growing confusion as his communication systems became increasingly erratic. The transmissions from a human colony made no logical sense, and yet they contained verifiable data. Critical information was buried within layers of what could only be described as weaponized nonsense. "Analyze," he commanded his primary communication officer. The bioengineered creature's neural tendrils began to twitch, overwhelmed by the incoming data streams. Troll Prime was doing more than sending messages. It was conducting a systematic assault on the Zarkak's fundamental understanding of communication itself. Humanity had discovered something profound. In a universe of species that communicated through precise, logical channels, pure chaos could be the ultimate weapon. Each transmission was a carefully constructed psychological trap. The memes weren't random. They were designed to trigger specific cognitive responses. The seemingly nonsensical content was actually a sophisticated attack on the Zarkak's neural processing systems. "We're not just defending," Dr. Okoro explained to a bewildered military attaché. "We're fundamentally challenging their entire conceptual framework of warfare." The quantum AI began to introduce more complex layers. Historical human cultural references that would be incomprehensible to an alien species became encrypted channels of actual tactical information. A seemingly innocent video of a human dancing became a complex algorithm that was simultaneously collecting and transmitting defensive data. Zarkak's communication systems, designed for clinical precision, began to break down. Their neural networks, which had successfully processed invasion protocols for thousands of civilizations, started to experience what could only be described as computational confusion. Captain Vornak watched in growing horror as his most sophisticated communication systems became increasingly unreliable. The human colony wasn't just resisting, it was rewriting the entire concept of interspecies communication. "Total communication integrity breach," his primary officer reported, neural tendrils now visibly trembling, unable to establish standard invasion protocols. Troll Prime continued its performance. Another transmission arrived, this time featuring a complex mathematical equation surrounding an image of a smiling human child holding a quantum computer. The psychological warfare had begun. and the Zarkax had no defense. The Zarkax had long believed that a civilization's strength was measured by its military hierarchy, rigid command structures, precise biological engineering, generations of warriors bred for absolute obedience. Epsilon Crucis colony demonstrated something entirely different. A living, breathing network where every individual was a potential strategic node. In the colony's central education complex, what appeared to be a standard classroom became something far more profound. 12-year-old Maya Rodriguez sat before a holographic display, her fingers dancing across quantum interface nodes. To an outside observer, she was playing an immersive strategy game. In reality, she was running complex battlefield simulations that fed directly into the colony's defensive AI. Scenario Delta 9 shows a 73% probability of breach in Sector 7. She subvocalized into her communication implant. Somewhere else in the colony, a team of retired engineers immediately began recalibrating defensive systems. This was total mobilization reimagined. Dr. Kendra Williams, the colony's chief integration strategist, watched the networks evolve in real time. What the Zarkax saw as a simple colonial settlement was actually a distributed intelligence system where every citizen was a potential contributor to the collective defense. The elderly didn't sit idle. Retired programmers developed intrusion algorithms. Artists created psychological warfare content. Even children in virtual reality simulators were unknowingly training military AI through their gameplay. It's not about individual heroism, Dr. Williams explained to a visiting military advisor. It's about collective adaptation. The quantum communication network that connected the colony was unlike any military communication system the Zarkax had ever encountered. Traditional military networks were hierarchical, with clear command structures. This network was more like a living organism, fluid, adaptive, with multiple redundancies. When a Zarkax attack disrupted one communication channel, a dozen others would instantly reconfigure. Information flowed like water, finding paths of least resistance, constantly rebuilding and rerouting. In the colony's medical research center, Dr. Alejandro Rice worked on something that seemed unrelated to defense, a breakthrough in neural network integration. What he was really developing was a method for faster-than-light information transfer that could completely revolutionize combat communication. A group of agricultural workers monitoring crop growth systems suddenly detected an anomalous energy signature. Within seconds, their observation was cross-referenced with military scanning data, geological survey information, and predictive AI models. What would have been a minor, overlooked detail in a traditional military structure became a critical piece of tactical intelligence. Major Jack Harper watched the network in action, still somewhat in awe of its complexity. "We're not just defending," he muttered. "We're evolving." The Zarkax invasion protocols were designed to target specific command structures, eliminate leadership, and a civilization would collapse. But Epsilon Crucis had no single point of failure. Every citizen was a potential leader. Every system was a potential weapon. In the colony's recreational zones, what appeared to be standard virtual reality gaming spaces were actually sophisticated training simulators. Players thought they were enjoying entertainment, but they were simultaneously stress-testing defensive algorithms, practicing coordination strategies, and developing adaptive response mechanisms. A retired quantum physicist developing advanced encryption for her community garden suddenly recognized a pattern in the Zarkax communication signals. Her observation, transmitted through the colony's neural network, became a critical component of the defensive strategy within minutes. Total system integration at 99.4%, the colony's central AI reported. But this wasn't just a technological statistic. It represented something far more profound, a civilization where every individual was simultaneously a defender, a strategist, and an innovator. The Zarkax were about to learn that humanity's true strength wasn't in its individual capabilities, but in its ability to function as a unified, adaptive organism. As the first wave of invasion forces approached, Epsilon Crucis colony was ready. not as a military installation, not as a collection of individuals, but as a single breathtaking network of human potential. The first Zarkax reconnaissance drone crashed precisely where Dr. Elena Rodriguez predicted. Its sleek obsidian shell, a marvel of biomechanical engineering, lay partially embedded in the synthetic rock of Epsilon Crucis, still humming with residual energy. Less than 3 minutes after its landing, the drone was already being dissected. Initial quantum matrix analysis complete, announced Dr. Yuki Nakamura, her augmented hands moving with surgical precision across the alien technology. Around her, a team of researchers from disciplines as diverse as synorchaeology, quantum computing, and biomechanical engineering worked with a single-minded intensity. This wasn't just reverse engineering. This was technological parasitism in its purest form. The Zarkax believed their technology was unbreachable. Generations of conquest had reinforced their belief in technological supremacy. Each piece of their equipment was designed with multiple layers of quantum encryption, biological authentication, and complex neural network protections. They had never encountered humans. Dr. Nakamura's team didn't just analyze the drone. They began to rewrite its fundamental operational parameters within hours of its capture. Where the Zarkax saw impenetrable security, humans saw an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. "Look at this," she called to Major Jack Harper, displaying a holographic breakdown of the drone's communication systems. Their quantum encryption is actually a cascading algorithm with a fundamental weakness in its recursive logic. What would have taken most species months or years to begin understanding, the humans were already weaponizing. The drone's neural network, a complex biomechanical system that had processed invasion data for countless worlds, began to transform. Its original purpose of reconnaissance was being systematically replaced. Instead of sending data back to the Zarkax fleet, it would now become a Trojan horse of unprecedented complexity. In the colony's deepest research levels, quantum computers began to interface with the alien technology, not just reading its systems, but actively rewriting them. The Zarkax had a saying, "Technology is the language of conquest." Humans were about to rewrite that language entirely. "We're not just copying," Dr. Rodriguez explained to a military observer. "We're translating their technology into something entirely new." A group of teenage programmers, pulled from various educational simulations, began working on what they called alien OS optimization. To them, this was the ultimate coding challenge. The Zarkax drone was becoming something its original creators would never recognize. Major Harper watched as the captured technology was systematically dismantled, analyzed, and reimagined. Each component became a potential weapon, a potential defensive system, a potential breakthrough. Quantum matrix reconfiguration at 67%, announced the colony's central AI. Potential defensive applications increasing exponentially. The Zarkax communication protocols began to experience their first systemic failures. What they believed was a secure invasion network was being slowly transformed from within. Their own technology was becoming their greatest vulnerability. Dr. Nakamura's team discovered something profound. The Zarkax's technological supremacy was built on a fundamental misconception that technological advancement was a linear progression. Humans saw technology as a living, adaptive ecosystem. A retired engineer who had once worked on deep space communication systems recognized a pattern in the drone's energy distribution matrix. Within hours, this observation was integrated into a completely new approach to quantum communication. The captured drone was no longer just a piece of alien technology. It was becoming a hybrid, part Zarkax, part human, something entirely new. Total system integration at 82%. The AI reported. Defensive potential. Unprecedented. Each piece of Zarkax technology that fell into human hands became more than a trophy of war. It became an opportunity. A chance to learn, to adapt, to transform. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but the Zarkax were already losing. Outside the research facility, the first of the transformed drones rose into the sky. To any external scanner, it would appear to be a standard Zarkax reconnaissance unit. But its programming, its very essence, had been completely reimagined. Technological parasitism complete. Humanity's true invasion was about to begin. The Zarkax warrior caste had never known failure. Genetically engineered across millennia, each individual was a living weapon. Neural interfaces seamlessly integrated with biomechanical armor, tactical algorithms hardwired into their very DNA. They were the pinnacle of biological and technological optimization, a species that had conquered thousands of worlds with mathematical precision. Epsilon Crucis was about to shatter that illusion. Captain Vornak watched his first wave of ground units approach the human colony's defensive perimeter. His neural link should have provided perfect tactical awareness, a collective consciousness that allowed instantaneous communication and strategic coordination. Instead, he experienced something unprecedented: uncertainty. The first squad of Zarkax shock troops moved with their standard synchronized precision. 20 warriors, each moving as a single organic machine, their movements calculated to the millisecond. They had broken entire civilizations with less than a full company. Then the landscape began to change. Not through traditional defensive mechanisms, something far more insidious. The ground beneath their feet began to produce auditory and visual stimuli that defied their neural programming. Holographic projections mixed with actual terrain, creating cognitive dissonance that their tactical algorithms couldn't process. One moment, a rock formation would appear solid. The next, it would resolve into a complex holographic illusion that contained actual tactical data. Lieutenant Area Chen, coordinating the psychological defense from an underground command center, watched with clinical fascination. Target their collective consciousness, she muttered to the colony's central AI. Break their unified perception. Each Zarkax warrior experienced something they had never encountered: individual doubt. Their neural interfaces, designed for perfect synchronization, began to experience micro-failures, not through direct technological attack, but through a complex psychological warfare technique that targeted the very essence of their collective consciousness. The terrain itself became a weapon of psychological destruction. Sounds emerged that shouldn't exist, mathematical frequencies that created cognitive dissonance, audio patterns that introduced subtle errors in their neural processing. Visual stimuli appeared that contradicted their sensory input, creating microscopic fractures in their collective perception. A Zarkax warrior would see a clear path forward, only to have that path dissolve into a complex holographic illusion that contained actual tactical information. Their attempt to process the contradiction would create momentary hesitation, a fraction of a second that, in combat, meant total failure. Dr. Imani Okoro, the colony's lead cognitive warfare specialist, had designed this assault specifically to target the Zarkax's greatest strength: their unified consciousness. "We're not fighting their bodies," she explained to Major Jack Harper. "We're fighting their collective perception of reality." The Zarkax had a fundamental belief that perfect synchronization meant invincibility. Humanity was about to prove that belief catastrophically wrong. Each warrior's neural interface began to experience what could only be described as existential confusion. Their collective tactical algorithm, the very thing that had made them unconquerable, started to fragment. Captain Vornak's own neural link became a conduit of growing terror. He could feel the microscopic failures spreading through his ground units like a cognitive virus. Warriors who had never known individual thought began to experience something profoundly dangerous: independent perception. One warrior would see a tactical opportunity that contradicted the collective assessment. Another would experience a moment of doubt that rippled through the entire unit's neural network. Their perfect synchronization became their greatest vulnerability. The colony's defensive systems didn't just block their advance. They systematically introduced chaos into their collective consciousness. Holographic projections mixed with actual terrain. Audio frequencies created cognitive interference. The very ground beneath their feet became a living psychological weapon that attacked their fundamental understanding of collective perception. A Zarkak's shock trooper would raise his weapon and hesitate, not from fear, but from a sudden, impossible moment of individual thought. "We're breaking their collective consciousness," Dr. Okoro said quietly. "One neural connection at a time." The first wave of Zarkak's troops found themselves doing something they had never done in their entire species history. They began to fail, not as a collective, but as individuals experiencing doubt for the first time. Perfection was about to meet its ultimate challenge: human unpredictability. The moment the first Zarkak's invasion force breached the outer defensive perimeter, Epsilon Crucis colony transformed. What appeared to be a standard civilian infrastructure revealed itself as a living, breathing combat organism. Orbital factories that hours before had been producing agricultural equipment now churned out advanced defensive systems with terrifying efficiency. Civilian transport ships became weapon platforms. Agricultural complexes converted into munitions production centers. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the central coordination hub, watching the total mobilization unfold with a mixture of scientific fascination and military precision. "We've been preparing for this moment our entire lives," she muttered to Major Jack Harper. Every citizen became a critical component of the defense. In the colony's medical research centers, teams that had been working on advanced neural interface technologies now rapidly adapted their research into combat support systems. Prosthetic development labs began producing advanced battlefield augmentations faster than the Zarkaks could track. What would have taken traditional military systems months or years was being accomplished in hours. The colony's educational complexes became military training grounds. Virtual reality simulators that had been used for scientific and recreational purposes now ran continuous combat scenario training. Children who moments before had been studying quantum mechanics were now running tactical simulations that fed directly into the colony's defensive AI. Adaptive production at 287% projected capacity, the central AI reported, a number that would have been impossible in any traditional military system. Retired engineers worked alongside teenage programmers. Agricultural workers repurposed harvesting drones into reconnaissance units. The entire colony was a single breathing combat system where every individual was both a defender and a potential weapon. In orbit, what appeared to be standard communication satellites transformed. Each became a potential defensive platform with capabilities that would have taken traditional military research decades to develop. Quantum communication arrays became weapon systems. Orbital construction platforms became mobile defensive structures. Major Harper watched as entire sections of the colony's infrastructure seemed to flow and reshape. Manufacturing centers that had been producing consumer goods now printed advanced weapon systems with molecular-level precision. 3D printing facilities that once created replacement parts for farming equipment now produced complex defensive technologies. The Zarkak's invasion protocols had been designed to target specific military installations. They had no framework for dealing with a civilization where every single component could become a weapon. Underground research facilities that had been working on advanced materials science now developed adaptive armor systems that could change properties in milliseconds. A team working on agricultural biomimicry suddenly found their research transformed into advanced camouflage technologies. Total system integration at 99.8%, the colony's AI reported. But this was more than a technological statistic. It was a demonstration of total societal mobilization. Civilian transportation networks became rapid deployment corridors. Communication infrastructure transformed into a distributed defensive network. Even the colony's waste management systems were being repurposed into defensive capabilities. Dr. Imani Okoro, the cognitive warfare specialist, coordinated a psychological defense that was equally adaptive. Social media platforms became information warfare tools. Entertainment networks became channels for tactical communication. Every piece of cultural infrastructure became a potential weapon. The Zarkaks had conquered thousands of worlds by targeting specific military installations. They had a precise understanding of how traditional societies organized their defense. Epsilon Crucis colony wasn't traditional. It wasn't even a colony in the traditional sense. It was a single, living combat organism. Orbital platforms that had been monitoring deep space research now became advanced sensor networks. Agricultural monitoring satellites transformed into targeting systems. The entire planetary infrastructure was reshaping itself in real time, adapting faster than any invasion force could comprehend. "They're not just fighting us," Major Harper observed to Dr. Rodriguez. "They're trying to understand us, and they can't." As the Zarkax invasion force pushed forward, they discovered something profound. They weren't fighting a military. They were fighting an entire civilization that had transformed itself into a singular adaptive combat system. Epsilon Crucis wasn't just defending itself. It was evolving. The final assault came with a fury that would be remembered across the galaxy. Captain Vornak committed everything. The entire strategic reserve of the Zarkax 7th Subjugation Fleet, a force that had reduced 1,000 civilizations to ash, converged on Epsilon Crucis. Thousands of biomechanical warships, each a living weapon of unprecedented complexity, prepared to obliterate what they believed to be a simple human colony. They were about to learn the true meaning of human resolve. In the colony's deepest command center, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood alongside Major Jack Harper, watching the incoming assault. Around them, generations prepared for what might be their final moment. But there was no fear, only determination. An elderly engineer worked alongside a teenage programmer. A retired medical researcher calibrated defensive systems next to a group of elementary school children running complex tactical simulations. Every human on Epsilon Crucis understood something profound. This was more than a battle. This was a statement about the nature of human survival. Incoming strategic assault, the colony's central AI announced. Total enemy force: 4,783 capital ships, 97,562 support vessels. Major Harper allowed himself a slight smile. Interesting odds. The first wave of Zarkax ships breached the outer defensive perimeter. What they encountered was nothing like any invasion in galactic history. The planet itself seemed to come alive. Entire mountain ranges transformed into mobile defensive platforms. What appeared to be standard geological formations revealed themselves as sophisticated weapon systems. Orbital mechanics became a weapon. Planetary infrastructure became a living, breathing defensive organism. Dr. Imani Okoro, the cognitive warfare specialist, activated the final stage of their defensive strategy. Every communication channel, every quantum relay, every piece of technological infrastructure became a weapon of psychological warfare. The Zarkax found themselves confronted by a defense that defied every known principle of warfare. Planetary defense systems that should have been fixed became mobile. Entire sections of terrain could reshape themselves in milliseconds. What the Zarkax believed was solid ground became a fluid, adaptive combat system. Total system integration at 100%, the colony's AI reported. But this was more than a technological statistic. This was a civilization fighting for its absolute existence. Captain Vornak watched in growing horror as his invasion force began to break down. Their perfect tactical algorithms, their millennia of conquest, their belief in technological supremacy, all of it began to crumble. The humans weren't just defending. They were reimagining the entire concept of planetary defense. Orbital platforms that had been communication satellites became weapon systems. Agricultural monitoring networks transformed into advanced sensor arrays. Every piece of infrastructure became a potential weapon. Children who moments before had been in educational simulations now ran critical defensive protocols. Retired researchers developed breakthrough technologies in real time. The entire colony was a single living combat system where every individual was both a defender and a potential strategic node. "They're not fighting like any species we've encountered," Vornak's tactical officer reported, his neural interfaces beginning to fracture. "They're adapting faster than our systems can process." The final assault became something between a battle and a fundamental reimagining of combat itself. Zarkak ships found themselves fighting not just against technological defenses, but against a planetary system that seemed to be a living, thinking entity. Defensive systems would appear where no sensors could detect them. Entire sections of terrain would reshape themselves to neutralize incoming attacks. Dr. Rodriguez watched the final moments of the assault with a clinical detachment that masked a deep understanding of what was truly happening. "We're not just defending," she muttered to Major Harper. "We're demonstrating." As the last of the Zarkak's assault force began to break, something became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a victory. This was a fundamental redefinition of what it meant to be a spacefaring civilization. The final transmission from the Zarkak's fleet was a mixture of confusion, terror, and something that might have been respect. Epsilon Crucis colony stood unbroken, not through superior firepower, not through advanced technology, but through an absolute, unbreakable resolve that the Zarkaks could never understand. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they were just getting started.